Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to be building an extremely tight budget gaming PC for a family friend. This is a project I was tasked with at a bad time to build a PC really, which is December of 2020 as I'm recording this. It's to be a gift for the individual, and unfortunately at this time, graphics cards, processors and everything else are sold out all over the place and prices are through the roof on pretty much all components. So the budget was £250 to cover the whole system, minus the graphics card. We actually got the GPU, was donated for free from another family member for the individual. So what we've got here is a GTX 760 2GB, an ASUS one. The rest of the parts, we've got an AsRock motherboard, which is an A320M-HDV R4. This is the cheapest AMD based motherboard around at the time because we're going AMD for this build. We've got a AMD Ryzen 3 1300X. So you can see the 1300X. That is lowest end kind of chip you can get on this platform really. It's cheap, it fits the budget for now, and it leaves a lot of upgrade options in the future. So that's a Ryzen 1300. This will support Ryzen 1, 2 and 3000 series processors in this board here. As you can see there, Ryzen 3000 desktop ready. So that allows them to put a Ryzen 5 or 7 or whatever, or even a different series of Ryzen in the future, just by changing the CPU. We're using the stock Wraith cooler that comes with the chip that's in the box. We've got one singular stick of RAM. This is a stick of Corsair Vengence LPX. It's a single 8GB stick, and that obviously we don't get the benefit of dual channel RAM by doing that, but it allows them to just drop another 8GB stick in and have 16 gigs in the future. Dual channel RAM isn't super important right now. The main use for this PC in the short term is going to be sort of schoolwork and stuff and college work for the individual who it's for. Gaming will be a secondary thing, hence the older graphics card and taking this route for the time being. It'll be upgraded down the line. Storage wise, we're just going mechanical because of how tight the budget is. So I've got a Seagate Barracuda LP 1.5TB hard drive, and that's going to be Windows, programs, games and everything. In the future, there is the option to put an M.2 SSD in the motherboard, or a SATA one as well. So that's left options open in the future, and the OS could be cloned over to that. Power supply. We went brand new EVGA 600 watt, 80 plus white. I've used that before. I've done an unboxing video before of it. That's on my channel up there. The same for the motherboard. I'll link all of these unboxings in the corner if you're interested in those. But the power supply is brand new, the motherboard is brand new, and the case is brand new. The graphics card is obviously used. The memory, the hard drive and the processor are all used but purchased from a store called CEX, which sells everything with a 24-month warranty, so you get a 2-year guarantee on all used items from them, which is why I made the purchase from those places for them. So that means that everything other than the graphics card has got a warranty on it for at least 12 months. The case I'm using is the CIT or CIT F3. It's a black and green theme. It's got a windowed side panel, and it's got green LED fans, so it will light up. I may even try and add some LED strips, depending on where we get with the rest of the build and what it looks like when it's done, but I think it might benefit from them. So anyway, all that out of the way, let's get to building this thing into the case. Okay, so I like to start with the motherboard itself in the build process. So I'm going to put the processor and memory and such into the board and have that ready. I'm also going to bring out the backplate because we're going to need that, and the SATA cables. So the first thing I'm going to do here is get the processor out and the cooler. Surprisingly, the CPU actually came in this proper box with a cooler and everything with it, and the cooler has also still got the original thermal paste. In my experience, when I've bought processors from CEX before, they've never come boxed or with a cooler. It's usually been just the chip itself. This has even got brand new thermal compound on it there, as you can see that I just touched. So I had actually ordered a additional Wraith CPU cooler off eBay, which is also a brand new one. But it turns out I won't be needing that. So now the first thing I'm going to get done here is unscrew these mounting brackets that come included on the motherboard, because this cooler doesn't require those. Instead, what it does is screws into the metal backplate that are behind these. I'll show you now. So with all 4 of the screws removed and both the plastic pieces, you'll notice that there's now this backplate here. So that stays there like so, and what we do is screw these screws into those holes, and that's what mounts the cooler. I'm going to be paying attention to the orientation. Obviously this will only go one way because, well, it'll go 2 ways, but there's a small gap here and a large gap here. So you either have the AMD logo on that side there, or the AMD logo on that side there. Obviously if you put it that way, you're getting to interfere with the RAM slots, so it should generally go that way over the VRM, which leaves your memory slots free. So when you've got all that ready to go, you can install your CPU. Just pull this retaining arm up, then we'll get the CPU out of the packaging. Being careful not to touch the pins. And if you have a look on the CPU, you'll notice a gold triangle. This should also be on the top of the chip itself. If you look at the motherboard, you'll notice that there is also a mark on there. And as well, you can also tell by the pins. If you look, these 3 corners are rounded and this one is square. If we look on the chip, we can see the 3 rounded and the 1 square one, where the golden triangle is. Okay, so now I've checked where the slanted and the square corner is, and where the mark match. I'm going to line the CPU up over the top of the socket. I'm just going to sort of place it on and just move it a little. And it should pretty much fall into place. You can see how it's sort of bedded itself in. Don't force it down, it's still slightly up on this side. So what I'm going to do is just give it a little bit of a wiggle. It's in quite securely. So I'm just going to push slightly on that side. And that is now installed. If you look all around, you can't see any of the gold pins any longer. When you're happy with that, you can just hold your finger on top and put the arm back down, and that locks the chip into place. It should now not come free. So now with those brackets off and the CPU installed, we can put the cooler on top. What I would advise doing is, if you've touched the CPU or anything, is to get a piece of tissue and just give it a quick wipe over. Make sure it's nice and clean. If you've got it, isopropyl alcohol is good for cleaning them, 99% preferable. But a piece of dry tissue or kitchen roll is better than nothing, just to get any grease or dust off it. Obviously, if your cooler has got paste pre-applied like this one has, you don't need to put any thermal compound on, you will just mount the cooler. If your cooler hasn't got paste on the bottom already, you will want some thermal compound. Usually comes in a syringe. This is quite a big syringe, but what you would do is take the end off, put a splodge on, and then apply the cooler. In this case, with the stock cooler, the new one that I'm using, the paste is pre-applied, so we don't have to put any extra paste on. So all we have to do now is line these screws up with the holes. Try and get the top in first, and then the bottom. And now we can tighten this down using just a screwdriver. So I'm just going to start the screws off a few turns, just so it's latched. Going diagonally. Then when there's a bit of pressure applied and it's gripped, I'm then going to actually start tightening down, corner by corner, all the way until it stops. You will get some grinding noises, those are natural, and that is just because of the springs on the screws. These apply the correct amount of tension pressure, so you just have to tighten these screws until they stop. Don't try and over tighten them. When they stop themselves naturally, they're at the right point. Okay, so with the cooler now screwed down to the motherboard, we can now plug the CPU fan into the CPU fan header. I like to put a little wrap around here just to keep the slack out of the way, and then plug it in. Be careful when you're putting this on and make sure you line up these two slits with the two slits on the actual header, like so, so as to get all the 4 pins in the right place. So with the CPU installed and the cooler mounted, we're getting pretty near to putting this in the case. The next thing to do is install the memory. On this board there's 2 RAM slots, and on any motherboard there will be markings, or you can also check the manual or online, and it'll say DDR A, B. There's A1, B1. So we're going to go with A1. Some boards have got clips on both sides here, some only have one side. These are the clips that hold the memory stick into the board itself. The ones with clips on both sides, make sure you open both ends before putting the stick in. On the ones that have only got one, you just open the one side. Then if you look at the memory, you'll notice there's a key or a notch in it. If you offer that up to the motherboard, you can tell which way around the stick goes in. If you look here, you can see the notch is there, and it's here on the stick. So that's the wrong way. We spin this around, and it matches up. So to fit this in, we just put the memory in the slots, like so, and then apply even pressure from both ends with your thumbs. I generally will try and start with this end here, only slightly ahead of the clipped end. It should then click into place, and if you have a look, we've not quite got that in. So if we apply a little more pressure, it's in now. That is now securing into the motherboard. So that is now everything done that we can do prep wise for the motherboard. We're ready to mount this in the case. So with that done, we can now put the motherboard out of the way to one side, somewhere safe, and bring the case in. So we'll undo the 2 screws on the side of the case and take the side panel off. There's a better angle so you can see in a little more. It's quite dark in here because it's an all black case. So in this case we've got fan connectors here. You can see that there's 2 on these. This is for either running the fans from the power supply, which will run at full speed all the time, or you can use these here plugged into the motherboard to have control over how fast and slow they go, and they'll automatically speed up and down. That's preferable, and I would always use them generally, but don't use both of these together. Don't plug power into them and into the motherboard. This one is for the front fan, this one is for the back fan here. Both the fans are also LED and light up in this. We've also got this little bag of accessories here. These are all the screws and things that we'll need for mounting everything into the case. These are all the front panel wiring connectors. So these are for the power switches, the headphones, and microphone sockets, the USBs, everything like that is all of these connectors here. So what I will do is undo this cable tie, and then I'm just going to post these out of the way down the back somewhere, so probably through this hole up here. It's just a case of having them out of the way. In fact, I'm going to take the back panel off to do this. So now at the back of the case, you can see all the access holes we've got for running the cables through. I am probably going to use this one for all of those front panel connectors. So I'm going to get all of these together and just poke them through that hole. And then we can sort them out later on. They're out of the way now. So the first thing to do in the case before you mount anything is to get the plate out of the motherboard box for the rear panel. This goes into the hole at the back here, and it's what puts the relevant cutouts in for your motherboard. This just push fits into the case. Generally start from the bottom or one corner. So what I'll do is I tend to put them in like this at the bottom corner, and then just run along the back, pushing them in, and then come up the sides and sort of work it down. They can be a little bit awkward sometimes, but if you're just persistent and keep going around it with your fingers, it will click in like it has done here. Then you can see the silver edge all around. The next thing to do is to mount the motherboard itself into here, or to at least look at how we're going to mount it. If you look at the screw holes in your board, the cases, most of them tend to come with mounts in certain positions. So this has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 already fitted. there's extra holes here and extra mounts in that bag if we require them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of just offer the motherboard up, not pouring it down into the case, but just stand it over where it's going to go, and just have a little look through the holes and check that everything lines up. So we can see these here do, this here does, and then up there do. Those are standard holes. But if we look here, this one isn't actually in the right place, it ought to be up there. That's because this is a slightly shorter motherboard. So if we put this in and screwed it in like that, this would short out and end up killing the motherboard. So what we want to do instead is take the motherboard back out. And if you note, this has got two positions, it can be there or there. So we need to move that. If you look in the bag of screws and accessories that came with your case, some cases include a little tool that's like a hexagon socket with a screw head on it. It's a piece you can put over those and use a normal screwdriver to take them out. Cheaper cases don't tend to come with them, this one doesn't. So the next best thing is a pair of pliers, like these here. So what you do is use these to remove the standoff fitting from the back tray in the case. Generally you only have to turn them a bit and then they'll come loose. So you can see this is just a threaded piece here. And then all we're going to do is move that up and screw it in the right place. It's very important that you pay attention to where these standoffs need to be, because as I mentioned before, you can kill the motherboard by having these in the wrong place. When you've screwed it back in, do it finger tight all the way as you can, and then do a little bit more just with the pliers, just to bite in, because you don't want this to come undone. We're going to be putting a screw in the front of it. So now that's done, we can put the motherboard back in, or offer it up again, and see how things stand. Some people usually put the power supply in first, but I tend to sort of test fit the motherboard, because it lets me know where I want the cables to come out. So if you look now, you can see all of our screw holes have got the little gold standoffs appearing in them. We can also see now that these holes are going to be a little bit blocked by the motherboard, but they're still accessible. We've got a little bit of room up here that we can possibly run cables, because we need to get the 4-pin in. And we also need to get the audio cables and so along here. A cheat that I often use in cases like this that haven't got very much cable management space down here to get cables through is use holes like these to bring the cables through. This is actually where the power supply will sit, but you'll have a small gap behind that will be able to get the audio connectors through. So I'm going to fish all of these cables through now and show you what I mean. Okay, so I've brought the audio cable out the bottom here, which will go straight up, and I've brought the USB in front panel connectors here. Normally I would bring all the USBs out here, but on this motherboard they've actually put the USB headers up this side here, above the SATA, so they're going to have to come out over here. Normally they'd all be along the bottom of the board here. The other problem with this case that I have a bit of a gripe with is the 4-pin for the CPU power. Now when you put the motherboard in, like so, you've then got to run the 4-pin around the side here, or up the front of the motherboard, and I don't like that, it's not very clean. What there is in this top corner there's a little hole here. You can just about see it there. And you can actually just about get the 4 or 8-pin CPU connector through there, and then it pops out from underneath the motherboard and plugs in. So I'm going to put the power supply in place as well now, and I'm going to bring that cable out the top right now. Then we can put the motherboard itself in place. So here's the power supply. This is the EVGA 600 watt 80 plus white unit. Pretty plain and simple really. All of our cables are here, all tied together. The power supply also includes screws in the box with it, so there's 4 screws in this little bag. I'm going to use those to mount it to the case. You can either put the power supply in with the fan up, which is drawing air out of the case from the back, or you can put it the other way around, which has the benefit of the power supply picking up fresh air from under the bottom of the case, from under the feet here. But if you put it fan down and then stand the computer on the carpet, you can suffocate the power supply. So don't put it fan down if you're going to stand your computer on a carpeted floor, or put something under your computer on the floor, a piece of wood or something. I'm going for the fan installed downwards, and I'm just going to throw all the cables up there for the moment. And I'm going to tuck the power supply behind that little bracket here. You can see our audio cable is still there. just around the back. And I'm just going to tuck that off to one side. So now with the power supply sat in place, I'm going to put some screws into the holes. I'm going to do diagonal corners first to make sure it's lined up. And you can see, as I mentioned before, there's multiple sets of holes depending on which way you mount the power supply. So the next thing I'm going to do now is just unravel all of these cables and work out what we need and what we don't. So we're going to need the 20+4 pin, and we'll click them together like so. We need that for the main power to the motherboard. There'll also be some of these connectors here which are split, labelled PCIe. Those are for the graphics card. So you can see the inputs on the card there. You would either have a 6-pin or an 8-pin depending on your card. If it's an 8-pin, you click them together and then push them in. There's also a 8-pin or double 4-pin, as they actually come, labelled CPU. We only need 1/2 of that for this motherboard. Some use all 8 pins, some use only 4. That's the one that we need to get up the back. Other than that, for this power supply, we've got a set of Molex connectors there, which we probably won't be needing. So I can wrap those up and just leave them in the bottom here in a moment. And then we've also got 2 sets of SATA connectors, of which we're only going to need 1 of these. So what I do is I get all the SATA and Molex and stuff we won't need, and I sort of put those here out the way for now. And first I'll thread the ones that we do need for the motherboard in. I'm going to leave the graphics card power cable up here as well, just for the moment. The one I really want to get in is this 8-pin. So I'm going to post that through the hole and fish it out the back. I'm then going to put this 24-pin through as well. And those are our motherboard power connectors. So the rest of these I'm just going to put down here for now, and we'll come back to them later. Going to the back of the case with the 24 and 8-pin through now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get the 8-pin first, and I'm going to sort of bring it across here, up, and then through that hole at the top here. So if you can split it, that can be easiest to get it through here, because sometimes the whole 8-pin physically won't fit. So I'm going to put the 4 through, and then I'm also going to put the other 4 through. Like so. And then that will come out behind the motherboard to go and plug into it. So with that posted through the hole up there, that can then be tied along using these cable management clips here later on with cable ties. You can also see the 24-pin that we posted through before. Let's come apart again. That's going to want to come through either this hole or this hole. On this board, it's quite high up, so I'm going to put it through the top hole. And then once we get that plugged in, we can cable tie and strap this down as well and start to neaten things up. But now we can get the motherboard in. So our 8-pin CPU power is through, and the 24-pin for the motherboard's through. The audio connectors at the bottom down here, and all the USBs and stuff are here out the way. That's the main stuff that we need in to put the board down. So I'm now going to screw the motherboard in. For this motherboard, we want 6 screws, 2, 4, 6. So if you look in the bag of screws that came with the case, you'll see a variety of different ones. These are the standoffs that we're using, and these are actually pre-threaded. So what you want are machine head screws, not self-tappers. So these here are not the type you want, the spiky ones. You want the ones with the flat edge on, that are like this. And those should be a good fit for in here. You don't want to use these really big ones either, because they'll become too tight, get stuck, and take these back out of the case with them. It's also worth making sure before we put the board in that this wire is flat along the top, so as it doesn't get in the way of putting the motherboard in place. So now we can drop the board in. We're going to start by offering up the rear ports to the backplate and putting it in on an angle, not putting it flat and scratching it around. So if we go down, we'll pick up the cable there, out the way, offer those up, and drop it in, not literally. And then if we look here for our little golden threads, and once you've got them lined up, just put one of them in. Don't tighten it completely, just leave it in a little loose. And that'll let you align the rest of them and just give it a little bit of a jiggle so they're all in straight. And now you can start to tighten them all up and put them all in. So with those 6 screws in, the motherboard's now secure. Remember to go back and tighten up the one that you put in loosely, so it's all nice and tight. So what I'm going to do now is just plug in this audio header down here. So if you notice, there is one pin missing on this cable, on the connector, and there's one pin missing on the motherboard where it says HD audio down there. So we're going to match those up and push that on, just like so. And that's that now installed and out the way, and quite hidden, which is why I brought it up down there. You could have run it along the bottom here, but it makes it more noticeable, so I tend to keep them hidden out the way. The next thing I'm going to do is that 4-pin power connector up here. So you can see it's up here. You need to work out which of the pins you want, because these clips match up with the little clip here on the top of the connector. It's important you put this in the right way, don't force it, and use the right 4 pins. So if you look, there's a square in the bottom right and a square in the top left. This one here has not got any squares on it, but this one here has got 2 squares on it, if you can just about tell on the corners. So this is the one that we want to use, we want this half. We'll push that in until it clicks. The other 4 pins we can just tuck up here somewhere out of the way. The other thing I'm going to do whilst we're in this corner is get this fan cable for the back fan, and I'm going to bring it down to where the fan header is. So for this motherboard, we've got a chassis fan 1 header here. We've also got a chassis fan 2 header, which is down here. There's no other fan headers but those, so we're going to have to bring this front fan over, probably to the chassis fan 2, which is down here, right over there. It will just about reach. So I'm going to use the back fan on fan 1. I'm just going to stretch this out a bit. What you can tend to do is tuck the excess cable under the fan, so it's not really visible. Line up the slits again, the same as the CPU fan, with the plastic piece on the motherboard. Push it on. So that's now on. You'll notice that this is only a 3-pin connector, and I put it on a 4-pin header on the board. That's totally fine. A 3-pin can go on a 4-pin. So I've tucked the excess fan cable along the bottom here where you can't see it, and brought it up in this corner where it's very hard to see because it's dead dark. But the fan cable does reach right up to here. So what I'm going to do to keep it tight and out of the way is just use one of these tie wraps that came with the case. I'm just going to put it through the cable, and I'm also going to put it through this little screw hole in the fan here, like that, and just twist it around and fold it out of the way. So that keeps all of the excess fan wire now taut up out of the way, and it won't drop down where you can see it. So the next thing I'm going to do in terms of cables is get this big main power for the motherboard cable out of the way, the 24-pin. So obviously you want to clip this together. You see these little things here, they go under the front, which keeps it locked together. Make sure it's underneath and it won't push back. And pay attention to the little clip here that's on this again. There'll be a little edge on the connector on the motherboard, which you can see there. That clip will lock into that. So I'm going to fold that around and push this in. It might take a little bit of a push and be quite firm, but you want that all the way in, so as it lines up and this clip is securely holding it. Next I'm going to start getting rid of all these other little USB cables that are here coming from the case. I'm going to attach them to the motherboard. For this chassis there's the USB 3 cable, there's a USB labelled cable which is the USB 2 ports, then there's also this one here that's for the card reader, and there's a selection of other cables here which are labelled for power switch, hard drive, LED, reset switch, etc. These are probably the most awkward ones to do of any. What I'm going to do is pull some of the slack back behind the panel of the case, from up in this corner here, where the cables come through, just to make this a little bit easier. I'm going to start with the USB 3 connector because this is probably the most awkward and big hard connector to get in. So I'm going to fold that over and bring it round here, noting again there's a little key on it and there's a piece missing on the motherboard one. So that goes in like so. It should sort of click in. Next we've got USB card reader. So these two here are all for USB 2 ports. We've got USB 3.4 and USB 5.6. I'm going to put the card reader on 5.6 and the ports on 3.4, but that's now plugged in and I've pulled a bit more slack out. Then we'll get the USB connector itself and plug that in at the side, which goes onto that one. And again, we'll post that slack cable in back behind. We'll neaten all this up with cable ties. For the time being, it's all going to be moving and be a bit of a mess, but the last one now are these here, which are always a bit of a pain and awkward for people at first. So you might not have all of these on your case, it depends. Not all of them have got reset switches or hard drive LEDs, but you're going to have a power switch regardless. So if you look on the motherboard, you'll find a header that's usually marked panel or front panel. That's right down here in the corner on this motherboard. So it's marked panel. There'll be one pin missing, and there'll be a row of 4 and a row of 5. Then usually there'll be a mark underneath it. So if you read this very closely, you can just about make out that it says PWRBTN, that's power button, then reset below it, and then it also says P LED, which is power LED, and H LED, which is hard drive LED. There's also pluses on some of them, or minuses on some. So the plus and minus matters for the LEDs, but not for the switch. So if you have a look on the connectors themselves that you've got on the case, they'll have a plus and minus as well. Generally you'll find the way that the text is printed on them, downwards like so, will be the right way round for the plus and minus, the positive and negative. And I would generally start with the power LED because they tend to be split as two connectors and just really awkward. So power LED tends to go in the top corner. Then hard drive LED usually goes below it. This is going to be really awkward to show you and plug them in at the same time. Then we're also going to want the power switch or power button, which goes at the side of power LED generally, and then the reset switch, which is the final one. And you should end up with them plugged in a little block like this. Just check that they're pushed in all the way, and that's that. We can then post this slack through the back and tidy that up. The other thing I'll do at this point as well is plug in the front case fan, which is this connector here. And I'm going to use the chassis fan 2 header that's down here. It's going to be a bit of an awkward run along here, but unfortunately there's not a lot that we can do about this. So I'm just going to sort of run it along the bottom. I'll actually tuck it behind these to keep it pinned back and under the back of the motherboard tray, and then plug that in. Down there and tuck this connector out of the way again. It's not brilliant, but there's not a lot we can do with that, unfortunately. A lot of boards usually have a header over here somewhere for the front fan, but this one doesn't have that, unfortunately. So with all that wiring out of the way, we've only got a few more things left to put in. This case includes the speaker, which just goes onto this motherboard down here at the side of the power button and LED connectors. That's just going to be pushed on like so, and it'll sort of hang loose, so you can kind of tuck it down out of the way. For all these front panel connectors, the manual for the motherboard will show you a diagram of what goes where. The next cable I'm going to put in is pretty much the last cable we need to put in, which is one of the SATA cables from the motherboard box. So this is for the hard drive to speak to the motherboard. So I've got the one here. I'm going to use the one with an angled connector because it can be a bit tight on the back of the case otherwise. The angled end generally goes to the hard drive and the straight end will generally go into the motherboard. These have got an L-shaped key, which is what dictates how you plug them into the motherboard. I'm going to thread this through from the back, down at the bottom again, and then I'm also going to post it into the bays where the hard drives go, like so. And I'll just bend this over, and I'm going to look at the board for SATA port 1 or 0. So this is 3-4 and this is 1 and 2. So I'm going to plug it in the furthest back port, which should be number 1. The clip will generally go that side up, and there should be enough room for it to be plugged in and disappear along the back of the motherboard tray like that. So all these cables are through at the bottom, which is the graphics card power, which we do need. And then we've got all these extra ones, which are for hard drives and disk drives and stuff, which I don't need most of them in this case. So I'm going to take one SATA cable here. This is for the hard drives and stuff, for the power. I'm going to keep that, so I'll put that out of the way. But the rest, I'm also going to put the graphics card one out of the way there. These are the ones I'm going to fold over on themselves. So, like so. And then I'm going to get the cable tie from the power supply originally and put that around all these. I'm just going to twist that up, and all these will sit down in this slit here in the bottom of the case out the way. I'm then also going to post the power for the hard drives out the back and the graphics card power connector as well through those holes. I'm now going to actually start strapping these cables into place. So what I'm going to do first is get everything sort of untangled. So these are all the front panel connectors here. I'm going to make sure that these are all up out of the way. Make sure all the slack is through on the back. And then what I'm going to do is get a cable tie and put that through here. And then I'm going to start tightening this down a little bit. Not completely, but just enough to hold them reasonably securely for the time being. Okay, so for some reason my phone decided to stop capturing whilst I was doing the cable management, but here we are, we're pretty much done cable management wise. It's not amazing, I know, but it's relatively clean. We've got all the front panel cables going up here and straight in. This is the 24 pin that I've just sort of bunched this excess here so it's not on show on the windowed side. This is the power for the graphics card, so that's running straight up and down. Instead of bringing it down here, I thought I'd try bringing it from above because it might also stop the card from sagging or dropping a little, but we'll look at that in a minute. I've poked these down here for the hard drive, so we've got the SATA data cable and a selection of power cables down there. So I just need to put the hard drive in the sled or screw it in, whichever. And then obviously this is our 8 pin and other bits and pieces that I've tied down. These need cutting obviously yet, but yeah, that's the back side. It's not too bad. On the front you can see the graphics card power cable here. I've made sure that it comes through the right way, so as the clip goes up into the card, and I'm going to probably put a little tie around that to hide the other connector so you can't see it from through the window. The other cables are pretty clean. I've tried to keep all these front panel cables out the way. I've tucked a little bit of extra up there into the void in the top of the case, and down at the bottom everything's relatively neat. This fan cable is rather annoying, but it's short and I haven't got any extensions to hand, so it'll do. I mean, you're never really going to see over there anyway. The window is only on this part. Next step, I think, is to put the hard drive in, and then we can get the graphics card in and see if this thing works, you know. Hopefully it'll work. So I'm just going to put it in this sled, the hard drive. So you just pull that out with them clips. It's got like a little mechanism here that makes it pop apart. You can actually also put the drive in just by bending it slightly, like that. But yeah. So the connectors go to the back of the case. Make sure you line the pins up with the holes in the hard drive. And settle that in. And then when it's in, just squeeze it together. And it should re-interlock. Like that. And we can post this in. Watching out for all those cables and things that are now in the way. So I'm going to take them back out. Just to push the drive in. Okay. So now I'm going to fold these power cables up and tuck them out of the way. I'm going to plug this in, paying attention to the L-shaped keying of it. Like so. And the right angled SATA data, as you can see, it comes quite close to the case, so you'd be pushed to get a straight one in here. So the right angle is brilliant for this. Again, clip side up, and make sure that just clicks into place. Then they're out the way in the bottom. The next thing is the last major part, which is the graphics card that's right here. So I'm going to take the screw out the back for the securing clips, and that just kind of drops out like that. And then looking at this, obviously our top slot is that vented one there, and then we want the next two down the middle too. If you're not sure, you can always offer up the card, like so, and just see which ones we need to take out. So the middle two. I'm just going to take that out by wiggling it. Push the other one as well, and give it a wiggle to snap it off. And then the card itself just slots in. So pull this clip on the motherboard back. You can see how it latches up. Make sure it's in the out position. Then line the card up. Offer it up to the motherboard. And if you just push, it should click itself in. A little bit like that. You can also pull the clip just to make sure. And it's probably easiest to lie it down and then put a couple of screws in these holes here. The screws for the rear cards are these big ones in this case, the ones with the big heads on them. So I'm going to put that one in a little bit. Get another one and put that in a bit. And then before you actually tighten this up like fully, just make sure that you can access these connectors, because if you push it too high, sometimes when the backplate moves, you can't actually get the plugs in for the HDMI and the DisplayPort. So make sure that is nice and level, and then tighten that down. And then I'm going to put this plate back in and put the screw in. This is probably one of my least favourite things, is this mount thing and the slots at the back, because as you can see it is a bit flimsy and cheap, but in a case at this price point, again, it's one of them things. But yeah, that's in now. We've got all our graphics card connectors. So let's plug the power in for the graphics card. So, as I said before, I made sure that the clip was the right way to hide this extra cable, which is nice. So I'm going to put those together to get the 8-pin and push that in. And that's kind of out of the way. So now I just need to neaten this power supply cable along the back here, probably somewhere. I fold it over. I need a tie or something to put around this. These are like really overkill for this job, but we're using them because it's all I've got to hand at the moment. Just going to undo this cable tie actually, and I'm going to tie it to the USB cable as well there. The little trick if you've got bigger cable ties like this is you can actually get that tooth with the screwdriver to disengage. So once you put it through, if it's stuck like that, you can either put it in here and do that to pull it out, or you can also put it in from behind like that and then pull the cable tie along the top to reuse them, so you don't have to cut them and waste them. Okay, so here we go. All the ties are now cut. This is the finished system, more or less. Or hopefully, if it posts, it's the finished system. There's the front side, and here's the back side. I'm going to put the back panel on, just to see that that will go on without any difficulty. This case has got this bulge on the side that helps with cable management. This is the only one that you have to watch here in the corner, obviously. But I think we'll be pretty good. Yep, that went on relatively easy though. I'm going to put the thumb screws back in on this side. So now the next thing to do is see if this thing actually powers up. Okay, so I've now plugged in a keyboard and mouse that's down here just off shot, and we're ready to try this thing. So the keyboard and mouse is in, the video connector into the graphics card, and the powered in. So let's see if this thing will start up. Turn the power on at the back, we've got light on the mouse, which is a good sign. And this graphics card has also got a little LED on it there that shows it's lit up. The motherboard hasn't got one though, but let's try and turn this on. Okay, it's not actually powering on. Right, right. So in this situation, then, what I'd do first is I'll pull all the motherboard headers off for the front panel. Just let me get you a closer look at this here. So yeah, down here where we plug the front panel in, it's quite dark in there now with the graphics card installed, but I'm just going to pull all of these off. So these are the power switches and stuff that turn it on. It's possible that might be bad. I'm just going to get a screwdriver, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch the two pins marked power button and just see if that works. Maybe the button on the case is a bit dodgy, but that's actually not making any difference either. Turn it off and on again. Okay. So the power switch doesn't seem to be the issue. The next thing then, I'm going to go and try. Let me move the keyboard out of the way. I'll throw the keyboard and mouse over there. So yeah, the next thing to try then is probably the power supply itself. I've got another power supply and I've also got a tester. So if I just get the one, I've got this spare power supply kicking around here. And I've also got a power supply tester unit here that you plug it in and it tells you that all the voltages are working. So I'm just going to unplug the power from the computer first. Take the 24 pin out the motherboard. Like so. And I'll just plug this into here. That was the last bit of power draining from it. So I'm going to leave everything else plugged in. There's not much point disconnecting everything. We're just going to see if the power supply turns on. And it actually does. The fan's running on it. All the lights are on, other than -5 volt, but that's fine. Just ignore that. So the power supply seems good. Right, I'm going to plug this other power supply into the motherboard and see if that makes a difference. We'll take the 4 pin out. I'm just going to plug the 24 and the 4 pin in out of these. Obviously I've not done the graphics card power and everything else, but I just want to see the CPU fan spin or it actually start up. That's the thing we're going for right now. This could be a dead motherboard. or a dead processor, or a couple of things. But if the processor was dead, I'd expect the fans to spin. I'm just going to short those headers out again. Nope, again, still no power, even with the new power supply. Right, this is not looking good, and it's the last thing I really need right now to have a dead motherboard. But I'm going to strip everything off the motherboard, disconnect it down to the bare board itself. So I'm going to take the graphics card out, I'll disconnect all the other wires. Also unplug keyboard and mouse and everything else. Just try without the keyboard and mouse in first, just for the sake of sanity checking. Oh, that was interesting. There's still a bit of charge in the power supply, and it actually spun up for a second there when I plugged that in. So the board is somewhat working. Oh, no switches. Still nothing though when you actually turn it on. How strange. Right, I'm going to take the graphics card and everything out and come back. So now all that's plugged into the board is literally the 4 pin, the 24 pin, and the CPU fan. Nothing else is connected. We'll try that. This is actually a really good justification for something I should have done, but I didn't do in this case. Normally you can test all the components outside of the case by standing the motherboard on the motherboard box, plug the power supply into it, drop your graphics card in, plug it into the screen, and shut out the pins here to turn it on, and that'll just allow you to functionally test everything. I normally do that, it's good practice, but I didn't in this case because I was actually in a rush, and now I'm paying the price for it, obviously. But if you look up here, I've done previous build videos where I've done that kind of thing before. So this motherboard must be dead, like not turning on from the factory. I'm going to actually leave the power supply turned on but remove this and just see if it's... I'll wiggle it and see if it's any loose. Because before it did light up when I was plugging this back in. Yeah, look, interestingly, if I put the power supply connector in but not all the way, the motherboard does actually power the fans. They're sort of pulsing and it's doing weird stuff, but it shouldn't be doing that. So there is something wrong. I'm going to have to go and get a replacement for this motherboard from Amazon. See, because the power's disconnected now, it's draining it, but yeah. So let me go and get a replacement motherboard and then I will be back. Okay, so the replacement motherboard has now turned up. This is the one that's dead that I've taken out. And then I've got the brand new one here in the box. So I'm just going to take the actual board out of there. I'm going to leave all the accessories in with the other board. I'm not going to bother undoing all the cable management. One thing I will say though is the screw is not pre-fitted on these boards for the M.2 slot. It actually comes in a little bag separate like that. So I'm going to actually put that in there. So if the drive is installed in here in the future, the screw is already there. You don't have to go searching for it, because they are little tiny awkward screws. Just a little tip when you're building, if your screw comes separate, put it into the board ready. Okay, so with the motherboard now swapped out, this is the new board installed here. The other one's in the box behind me, ready to be sent off back to Amazon. I've connected up, as we did again, the power cable, video cable, etc. Now you can see everything's connected internally. I've not turned the power supply on yet, so I'm going to do that now, which gives the mouse light over there. Come on the graphics card, the little LEDs on there. Then we're going to try and fire this up. Well, that's a lot better looking already. You can see the fans are lit up, CPU fan, front fan. I can even hear the hard drive ticking. Graphics card's fans are spinning. There's been no beep yet though for post or it actually starting up. Ryzen can sometimes take a little while though. So it's been about 2 minutes of waiting. There's actually still no display. So I'm going to pull the power out of this thing and just try and turn it on again. It actually came on straight away this time. I'm going to hold the power button to force it off. and then turn it back on. Oh, it's now just posted, it's just displaying. You can see the AsRock screen there. So it actually just needed a while to wait, and obviously restarting as well. So we can see here, F2 or delete for setup. So I'm going to press delete on the keyboard, and there we go, we've got the BIOS. So we can see it's an A320M-HDV R4.0 with a Ryzen 3 1300X. We've got 8 gigs of RAM detected, but at 2133 MHz. Now I'm not sure if that's the highest this CPU supports, I'll have to check that really quick. Okay, so I got the RAM running at 2400 MHz. Summit Ridge, which this chip is, supports up to 2667 before you get into OC, like mode, overclocked. So all we had to do for that was go to OC Tweaker, go to load XMP settings here, and it was on auto. So if you change that down to XMP profile 2, DDR2, 2400, whatever your RAM is basically, and then go across to the end, exit, save changes and exit, yes, and then that applies the XMP profile and lets your RAM run at the highest speed. Something else I would recommend doing as well is going in the BIOS across to boot, going down to find boot beep and enabling that, because it was disabled by default, and this just makes the speaker in the case beep when the computer has started up successfully. It's just handy for troubleshooting. So something else now the system is completed is we can have a look at that green LED fan and how much it lights the case. It's not brilliant really, as you can see it's still quite dark in there. So what I've done is got a length of old LED strip I had kicking around spare. This is actually RGB strip, red, green and blue. As you can see it's got all the different connectors there. But I've just wired the green up in it, so this will just light green. Just a 2-piece length, and then I've soldered this piece of cable to it, and this through cable here, which I got off an old computer fan. I cut that off and I've soldered that and heat shrinked it together there. So I'm going to install this into the case. Now the adhesive's not very good on these strips anyway, and this has been used before previously. So what I'm going to do is attach it to the top of the case, probably using hot glue. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so the strip is now fitted to the top of the case. I've put it into this section where the board is, because that's where the window is, and it's actually hot glued in, so it might be quite hard to tell, but there's hot glue all along the full length of it, and then it's stuck into the case quite securely, so it isn't going to drop down at any point later on. Then I've also used a couple of splodges of hot glue along the cable here, just to glue it to the front of the case. Brought it down into the hard drive bay and plugged it onto those Molexes on the power supply. So let's get the side panel on and have a look what this thing looks like now. So here it is before we put the side panel on. We can see the strip up there just about. There's lit up green, the green fan and everything else. There's a lot more light in the case in general. So let's get the side on. Okay, so this is the system now with the side back on and the LED strip in. There's the front fan. There's the side panel, which is lit. There's light spilling out of the case onto the desk as well. And you can see everything. It doesn't really look very green on this video. The iPhone seems to be changing the video settings, so it doesn't look great, but it does actually look a lot better in person. I'll put a picture on the screen here to show you what it looks like anyway. So there we go, everything's installed and we're now within Windows. We've got the quad-core Ryzen 3 there, 8 gigs of memory, the 1.4 terabyte as it's detected, but yeah, 1.5 terabyte hard drive, and the GeForce GTX 760 all detected. I've run Memtest, Prime 95, MSI Combustor and a few other utilities, just to confirm that everything's working as it should be, and everything has passed the tests with flying colours now. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you found this video interesting, please leave a like down below. Any questions or feedback, put it down in the comments section below, and be sure to get subscribed for future random computer building and technology videos like this one. Thank you for watching.